Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort. It is 5:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Yesterday was Prep 14.6 day. Got that all done. You know how it is, trying to make a patch with everything changing and stuff like that. But nah, it's a relatively small patch. Like I said, we're hitting the end of a set. Things are going to be small. Now is going to be where people complain that like things aren't changing enough, so we're at that part of the set. I also had some, it was a very meeting filled day, but I had a lot of good meetings. They were very productive. So yeah, things were good. Overall, things seem to be relatively quiet in a good way on the TFT scene. I think we're heading towards everyone getting ready for the third cup and regionals and stuff like that, but yeah, overall, this is one of the quiet periods, so now it's just make sure the next set's ready to go. It's kind of weird to think about, but today's June 3rd, and the next set goes to PBE July, 10th, give or take. So we're 5 weeks away from the next set on PBE. So, yeah, pretty crazy. Yeah, otherwise, that's kind of it. All right, questions. We have questions today. I don't need to monologue too long here. Let's just do questions. What are they? Yeah, okay. Cool, okay. So I'm kind of summarizing this question here. The question was sort of what all goes into item names? Because the person was asking hey, is it a problem that or do designers think about the fact that there are 3 items that can be abbreviated as GB, right? Gunblade, Guardbreaker. I forget the third, but there's one more. Ginsu's. Yeah. Do they think about that kind of stuff? Or why are their names different than the league counterparts? Things like that. Now, here's kind of an interesting thing here. I am the type of player that doesn't worry too much about the names of things. I find naming things to be one of those things that people often spend way too much time on that doesn't actually make that big a difference. So it's one of those things that I usually kind of let other people solve just because it doesn't matter to me, right? Whether we call it Static Shiv or Lightning Blade or Spark Sword, I don't care. Whatever we pick, we'll learn it. It'll be fine. They'll all work out. I just don't see it as that big a thing. Now, that being said, though, what I will say is one of the challenges is that sometimes designers get too clever for their own good. And so typically with names, you're going to laugh, but I always tell people when you're coming up with a name for something, you need to think like a second grader. It's what are simple words that are easy to learn, things like that, because otherwise, if the word is too complicated, people will just be like, huh? Right? I feel like if you look at a lot of the Radiant items, they fall victim to this trap pretty hard. If you can name all the Radiant items, you are a smarter person than I am. I certainly can't, because I can name some of them, like More Morella Nomicon, because that's funny. But what's the new Void Staff called? It's Ikatha's Revenge, or I don't know. So when we're coming up with names, though, we do think about things like that. It's sort of you'll imagine, let's say we're naming Static Shiv, right? Spark Sword, whatever, right? You'll list them all out, and then you might go, hey, we have too many items that are sword. Or it's weird that BF Sword, BF Sword upgrades to Spark Sword, or doesn't upgrade to Spark Sword, so why did the sword, you can have all sorts of logic and justification for your names. It's really up to you to figure out what you want to name it and things like that. Now, this is where a framework can come in. We're sort of okay, let's figure out a framework for our names. And we actually recently just did this. And so for us, what we decided was, hey, if the item has been in League of Legends for longer than 7 or 8 years, so a long time, and it's one of those items that longtime players of League are very familiar with, we should keep it around, right? So Infinity Edge shouldn't be called Critical Blade. It should be Infinity Edge because that's what people know it as. It's Infinity Edge. But if it's a more recent name that people aren't as attached to, instead, we should try to be relatively literal with the name as much as we can so that you kind of like can infer what it does. And so this is where, like, for example, the first time we named Guardbreaker as Guardbreaker, it was sort of like, well, what does it do? If their shields are up, you do extra damage to them. So it breaks them when they're guarded. All right, Guardbreaker seems fine, right? Because if it was called, I don't know, some other name, you might not be able to infer that. And if you're not a League player, it's a big confusing word, things like that. And so one of the reasons why I asked the team to change it from Guardbreaker is that we're no longer breaking guards. It doesn't break shields anymore. The name I gave was Crit Striker. So it's like when you crit, you do more damage. Now, we didn't go with that. The people who care more about names didn't like the idea of having the word crit in the weapon. It feels weird. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And so I think they went with Striker's Flail, which totally fine. You strike somebody, whatever. Not a big deal to me, but it couldn't be Guardbreaker because it doesn't break guards anymore. So stuff like that. That's kind of our framework. But overall, especially in the future, you should look out for us to name things a little more intuitively. Now, this doesn't just apply to items. This is also traits. Traits have the exact same thing, where it's like if you can't infer some of the trait names and what they do, we're kind of in the wrong spot, especially in classes. And so hilariously enough, actually, with the next set, we had a bunch of names and we looked at them and we're just like, what the hell is a blank? What does that do? I think sometimes designers get a little creative or a little too thematic. For me, an example of this is like techie in 14. It's like, what does a techie do? It's like, oh, well, they're just the magic users. Really? Well, that's not that intuitive. Okay, sure. And so in 15, we actually recently did a pass, and I can tell the story once the names actually come out of what the traits are. But it's like, oh yeah, that used to be called this. It was super unclear. Then we changed it to this, and it's like, oh yeah, now I know what that trait does. Okay, cool. Because again, trait names should be something that you can intuit. I mean, not just, basically all names should be something that you can sort of like intuit what it does while still sounding cool. And because the reality is there's so many names, if something is called Techie versus Tech Wizards, it's not a big deal, right? Like the difference a good name makes or doesn't make is very little, in my opinion. It's one of those things. It's fun for a designer to come up with a cool name or an artist or whatever, but you really shouldn't be spending that much time on it. Don't overthink it. And this is a trap a lot of junior designers run into also, is like spending your time on the wrong things that don't have that big of an impact to the quality of the game. And names, I think, are one of them. But, so TLDR here is like we think about all this stuff, and we definitely try to pick a good name and have a decent framework. But at the end of the day, this is the kind of thing I just don't think it's worth spending that much energy on. It's just not that big, that impactful. Now, how long until I stop calling it Guardbreaker? We'll see. Habits are hard to break. Habits are very hard to break. Apparently, some people still call it Guardian Angel, even though it's Edge of Night. People still call the duplicators Nikos. So, you know how it is. Okay. Next question. Oh, yeah. Why do you think Remix Rumble was so successful from a design standpoint? And that many people often herald it as one of the better sets of all time. Okay, this one's fun. So, internally, set 10's a good set. It's not our best set by any means, but it's a good set. Very, very good set. Now, if you look at every TFT set and you did a poll of whether or not set was good or not, and did it, across the wider player base, believe it or not, the differences between sets wouldn't actually be that high. Some of you would actually be surprised to find out that, there are players who loved Dragonlands. There are players whose Monsters Attack is their favorite. There are players who loved Legends. Every set has their fans and their favorites. Because really, we've had making sets down pretty packed since 7.5 pretty solidly, I'd say. There are, if you're one of the super engaged people, you can nitpick differences or mechanics you like or don't, right? There are people that are going to say they hate 9 for Legends or they hated Dragonlands for the dragons. The same reason people love them, right? All of that is very subjective. But when you really think about the sets that elevate a level above, they have a key innovation in them that makes them stand out compared to other TFT sets. For example, oftentimes some of the people who've been around a long time will say set 6 is their favorite. Not necessarily because the champions or the traits or anything like that, though those are good too, right? I love Tom Kench. But really it's the augments, right? Augments were this big innovation that set the game up and did great things. But the reality is that innovation does not have to come from just gameplay or mechanics. And in Set 10's case, I think a lot of people really enjoyed the innovation that is that music system, right? That music system did very, very well. It put another layer that made it very memorable. So that let's assume Set 9 and 10 and 11 are all the same quality bar from a gameplay and mechanical standpoint. Well, why would you pick 10 to be your favorite over 9 or 11? The music system, right? That thing is very memorable, very, very innovative. And so I think for a lot of players who hadn't experienced something like that before, it's a very memorable thing. And that's the thing with humans and how they interact with video games. Hey, bunny. Bye, bunny. Your first interaction with a new thing that you've never experienced before will be very memorable, right? The first time you played a platformer game is probably one of your favorites. Your first TFT set is probably one of your favorites. Your first MMO. MMOs are a great example because your first one's amazing. Then you play your second one and you're like, I've already done this. I don't care. So, having that innovation that feels like, it's your first time interacting with something can elevate it a level above. So I think that was probably the biggest thing that deserves credit for a lot of people loving 10. Now, there are other things that you could point to, right? Like Heartsteel is one of our best cash out mechanics ever. Or some people really like Headliner. And Chosen is, as much as some people will hate to hear this, for a set mechanic, Chosen / Headliner is a good set mechanic. It's a solid set mechanic. I wouldn't want it evergreen, but it's fine. It does good things. Yeah. So, like I said, music system, I think, gets a lot of the credit. Champ and trait design was fine. There was good stuff in there. I think KDA did pretty well. There were some good champions in there as well. Sona, Yorick, stuff like that. So, overall, but that's the thing. All the stuff I'm naming now is yep, it was a solid set. Just like Set 9 was a solid set, and Set 11 was a solid set. Also, if you're one of those people that over-indexes on balance, Set 10 was very well balanced. The balance team did a good job with that one. So, yeah. But big thing here is innovations. Innovations matter a lot. Innovations create memorable moments. And the music system, I think, gets a ton of credit for Set 10's success. So, there you go. All right, here's a silly one before we get to the meaty one today. If you had an all expenses paid trip for a year, where would you go? Now, for fun here, for those of you who don't know, I asked my wife this one to kind of illustrate how we are as people. Our answers were different, but not that different. So my wife said she'd want to go somewhere in the middle of nowhere where there's a really scenic view, where you can like look out and see mountains, and just hide in a cabin for a year. That was her answer. Go somewhere, really scenic view, middle of nowhere, not to be disturbed by people, and chill at a cabin. My answer is actually, I don't want to go anywhere. I'll just you pay my expenses for a year while I chill at home. I'm an introvert. If I had my choice, it's like, I was thinking about places I would go. Maybe Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii, but a year in Hawaii sounds dreadful. Vegas is fun for like 4 days. A year in Vegas? No way. Although, all expenses, if that means gambling, could be fun. But yeah, I mean, realistically, when I have spare time, I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to chill at home and do my own stuff. Having to leave and travel, so I like my things. I like my blankets, my pillows, my chair, all that stuff. So if that's going to tell you something about me, is that I don't like to travel. And when I brought that up to my wife, she's like, well, I mean, if it's all expenses paid, we should take advantage of it. So I wouldn't want to stay home. She's like, but I want to find somewhere that's like home with a better view. It's like, okay, fine. So yeah, not the most interesting answer, but I'm not a traveler. In fact, every time I have to travel, I'm sort of like, the act of traveling until you get to the destination is awful, right? Like Macau, ugh. It's not that Macau is bad. It's that the like literal 24 hours of travel to get there was bad. I can't think of much else. I'd rather do less. So, okay. I only brought one more question today, but it is a meaty one. What if TFT was balanced by the community? Now, this is a common thing that comes up all the time, because whether it be some YouTuber or some player or streamer or whatever that immediately thinks, because they identify a problem or two, that clearly that means they can do the job better. I've been dealing with this for a long time. Players can have this perspective of what it was like. Now, here's the problem that I've found. And I've said this before. If you've ever watched my stuff for a long time, you've probably heard me say something like this. And hilariously enough, I was just working with somebody yesterday on balance, and we ran into the exact same thing, because it is a skill. Okay? And that is that players are absolutely incredible at problem identification, but they are atrocious at solution generation. Right? So let's take a look at the current meta. Maybe you're somebody who goes, hey, the board where you play Elise and Morgana in the early game is way too strong. Okay? That might be a true statement. And some of our top players have figured out that like Elise 1, Morgana 1 with a solid front line can streak and outperforms any other board of similar power. Good job, community. You're right. Like that is a true statement. Ooh, it's another bunny. So many bunnies today. That is a true statement, and the players are right. Like, that's true. Okay. So what do we do about it? Why is that true? What's going on here? The first thing that players will always say is, well, nerf Elise and Morgana, because they're the ones doing damage. Congratulations, you just killed every possible build that has Elise and Morgana as carries. Elise 3 now becomes a completely unclickable unit. Morgana 3 is completely undesirable, and you will never play those units at all. Good job. But you didn't actually solve the problem, because what you weren't thinking about was the fact that actually what's going on here is you have a strong front line, and your strong front line is generating mana per second compared to somebody else's strong front line. So you're getting a ton of extra damage from them, and they actually shield more often than other people's front line. So Dynamo is actually increasing the effective health of your front line. And so your front line is better than the opponent. So even if the DPS was equal, you're winning because your front line just has higher EHP. And so actually what you didn't realize was Dynamo is the core reason. And so it's Dynamo that needs the nerf, not Elise and Morgana. And so that can lead to, had you gone through with the action of nerfing Elise and Morgana, you've removed builds from a meta where there are lots of viable builds, and that's not great. And that's the thing with TFT, is everything is so interconnected. Now, let's say you do nerf Dynamo, spoiler for next patch. Well, what happens if you nerf Dynamo? Well, MF becomes a lot harder to play, because MF without Dynamo is like basically unplayable right now. So maybe you need to give mana compensation to Misfortune, so that way things like Elise Morgana in the early game aren't as good, but they still can cap really well. And those are the kind of things that a lot, when we say, can the community balance the game, they don't really think about. And I would worry that we talk about balance thrashing. The community balancing the game would lead to a lot of balance thrashing. Because again, when you talk to players about things, they say buff and nerf. They say this is going to be broken or this is going to be weak, but they don't actually understand all the different parameters and different variables that can be used to get something to the scene that you want to get it to. And, I've watched many a patch rundown of people that aren't me go through the exact same thing, where they're like, they have no idea. They're just going to wait for the stats to tell them and then go, yep, I would nerf that. I would buff that. Thank you. That's the easy part of the job. Literally the easiest part of the job is loading up the stats on Sunday or Monday, going through and going, here's the stuff out of line. But reading those stats and understanding them is much more important. So here's another example. Let's say you took a look at the Augment Anima Squad Circlet. Okay. Now all Anima Squad Circlet does is give you an Anima Squad emblem and I believe a champion. Doesn't do much. It's a prismatic. It's one of our new circlets. And that's it. That's all that augment does. And if you look at our top 1%, the stats on Anima Squad Circlet, that augment has I think it's like a 4.55, but it has like a 24% win rate or something. It's like 22, it's a 22, I think. It's like 22% win rate. And so your first reaction might just be, is this augment OP? Do we need to nerf the augment? It's like, well, no. Think about it. Why would Anima Squad Circlet have an insanely high win rate? Well, it's pretty obvious. The top 1% of players are only taking Anima Squad Circlet when they have something like Wandering Trainer or Golems, and it puts them in a position where they could realistically chase for 10 Anima Squad. And it turns out, if you're going to hit 10 Anima Squad, you have a very high win rate, right? Like, the cause and effect of those stats needs to be understood. And sure enough, by the way, if you look at Street Demon Circlet, almost identical stats. It's like, yep, because our top 1% of players only take these circlets when they are in the position to chase the prismatic trait, which then means, from there, the top 4, not as often, because it is still a risk to take those, but when it pays off really, really good. That's just the design of the augment, right? Golden Ox is another example where, like, right now, if you look at Golden Ox stats, the win rate of Golden Ox is insane. Top 4 rate, pretty standard, but win rate, really, really high. It's like, yep, that's kind of the design of the trait, is that when that thing gets going and snowballing, it caps out insane. And so you have to kind of balance around that, but the answer can't be balance the fun out of it and just make it flat like every other trait, because then you have a very boring game. And that would be the other thing I would risk if the community balanced the game, is that they would go to sort of known goods and sort of be like, well, look, this trait gives exactly 40% damage amp. So Golden Ox should be capped at 40% damage amp, and there'd be no peaks. It'd be, let's get everything to be very similar to known good, leading to a much less exciting game. And so understanding those would be important. Uh-oh, did I bump this? Uh-oh, hang on. Nope, we're still good. Okay, well, I'm going to hold it the last few. I was afraid I bumped it. But yeah, so the community balancing the game, I think, would just lead to some pretty boring things. Now, here's the other thing. As I say that, there's at least one person watching right now who's going, oh, that's just Mort saying that. Mort thinks his team is good at balancing the game, way better than people, but I bet players could do it better. But here's the thing, and again, sorry, this is part of me being old, is I've literally seen this, right? I have hired people who are challenger level, brought them in, let them balance the game, and seen it be a train wreck. It has happened, right? Like, it takes a deeper understanding to sort of know, and, I'm not even gonna lie, I wasn't good at it the first 2 years. Some would argue I'm still not good at it. Ha ha ha. But that's part of experience, right? Experience is you learn that it's like, oh yeah, here's this one time I made this mistake, and now I know when I do this in the future, watch out for that, right? Or I know when I look at a stat that looks a little weird, here's usually the cause. A really common example of this is like anyone who looks at the stats of any Cypher champion right now, it's like, they look really bad. And it's like, yeah, I've been doing this 5 years. Guess what? Every single set, all the high-risk trait champions look like garbage in data because there's a bunch of people playing them, and they don't play them right, and they don't hit. Like, for example, we were looking at the 3-star 2 costs yesterday, and LeBlanc was number 1 by, like, a significant margin. Is LeBlanc good? No. LeBlanc is one of the worst in the game. All that is the only people in the top 1% playing LeBlanc 3 are either they have the exact perfect build for it, which is very rare, or it's just the damn Cypher cash out. And it's somebody who played a very high Cypher game. And so the only boards with LeBlanc 3 on them are Cypher boards that did well. Guess what? Those do really well. Shocker. So understanding the data, understanding the cause and effect, understanding how, because again, all data is a representation of what is, not what can be. But as a balance designer, you need to make sure what can be is the goal. And that's why balancing isn't just number adjustments. It's also having a vision of how you want the game to be. And that's the thing I think the community would be pretty lacking. So, yeah. TLDR here, I think it'd be kind of a train wreck. I think they would help, like, a better version of this actually would be like, imagine if you had a council of challenger players, and that council of challenger players would, each patch, prepare a list of things they want addressed. And then you would hand that to a designer to go, now solve these. That would probably be the best way to utilize the community, because they would be really good at, like, look, here are the pain points, right? And that's why I do think listening to the community matters, because they'll be the ones that are bringing up these pain points and talking about 0 item krugs and how painful that is, or how hard it is to deal with the extreme variance between item distribution, right? Like, those are good problems to solve. And so we should solve those. But I would not also rely on those same players to come up with the solve, because their solve would be, well, every game you just get 16 items. And it's like, well, stop. That's a boring game. So, all right. About a half hour here. Those are the questions I had prepared for the day. Today is my one-on-one day. And then there's also this optional thing that's happening at Riot that me, Blue Velvet, and Giovanni are doing. It starts every night at 5 p.m. It's like 5 p.m. till late. So I'm going to be doing that. It'll be interesting. Kind of looking forward to it. Should be fun. So can't talk about it though, but it's a fun optional thing that we're doing. So yeah. All right. That's going to do it for me. Hope you have a good Tuesday. Hope you're enjoying the patch. Pretty standard, solid, good patch. Weekend coming up, patch rundown, stream, stuff like that. Should be good. So there you go. I'm gonna go have breakfast. All right. That's gonna do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.